Hello, John.
Hi, James. How are you going?
Yeah, good.
James, thank you for agreeing to do this interview. What I wanted to discuss today, a lot has been said about sort of when you left the board, but I want to go a bit back because my podcast
Mm.
concentrated on sort of what went wrong at Vocus. Now, up until the time we bought MCOM, everything was going really, really right. So what made you decide in the beginning that you thought M2 would be a good fit for Vocus? I mean, you had built the most amazing business and you had taken it from next to nothing to a company that was almost worth $5 billion at its peak. And all of a sudden, we take over M2 and the demise was fairly rapid. What made you
Yeah,
decide? Sorry.
it was really three things. It was cash flow, synergies, and scale.
Right.
M2, purportedly had really strong cash flow. I think it was in the vicinity of 70 million of free cash flow in a year. So that was a goal for us because that helped fund our fiber network, and we could really leverage that and grow the business. And we're getting immense returns on our fiber network. The second one was, sort of scale, I guess. Scale it brought us would allow us in the future to buy next gen networks, which was, at the time, incredibly important and cheap deal. When next gen at the time, I think people thought we overpaid because we paid, I don't know, was it probably
870 odd million.
$870 million, so probably about 10 times, just a bit under 10 times EBITDA, or maybe a little over 10 times EBITDA. Everyone thought that was expensive at the time, but it was half replacement cost. And, in today's environment, or, a year ago, that would probably have been trading on, 18 times, 20 times EBITDA and cost, double what it was. So, the scale that it brought us was good. And the last one was synergies. We did an immense amount of work on synergies, and the synergy prize was pretty enormous. You'll know the numbers better than I. And those are really the three things. What went wrong was the cash flow was not really real. It didn't eventuate. The scale was, and that helped us buy next gen. And then the synergies weren't real as well. So, synergies and cash flow was really the demise of the deal, and they were the two of the three really important parts for doing the deal.
So if I look back on my time, we started this relationship, and you walked into your first meeting with Vaughan, and you were very effusive in your praise of Vaughan. I remember you saying that Vaughan is one of the nicest guys, and he answered back every email, etc. And Jeff was in the room, and then things started to unravel between you and Jeff. I remember trying to play peacemaker between the two of you, and I phoned Jeff quite a lot and said, Jeff, we need to make this right, and you need to phone James. And Jeff was saying, I need James to apologize. And I said, what does James need to apologize for? And I never got an answer out of Jeff as to what he was angry with you about. But he was very angry with you, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why. I mean, I think Vaughan is a great guy. Vaughan's a lovely guy. Jeff, I think the difficulty was Jeff was just totally out of his depth. He was in an industry that wasn't his industry. He, coupled with the fact, I think he didn't really like to hire or hear from people, below him that were smarter than him. So, if you're not from the industry, you have to really hire people with more experience and better than you below you, and then that's how you kind of solve for that long-term, lifelong experience in the industry that kind of telco requires. So I think he was sort of a little bit out of his depth in a lot of ways, and then was really unable to, allow the decisions to come upwards. He would have to be the decision maker. It was based on his, intuition rather than maybe sort of fact base, and I think that was probably the problem. Maybe that led to a fall in the relationship because Vocus, we were kind of all facts based, and we would really simply just look at the facts, irrespective of whose idea it was, or whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, whether it made something look bad or look good. It just didn't matter. We just needed the data, and then we would revise our decisions and move on. So a bit of a culture clash, I guess. I don't know what specifically it was that I needed to apologise for. If I make mistakes, I'm happy to apologise, as you know, John. Yeah, and I think what went wrong was just that lack of information. I remember, from the first meeting we ever had, we were asking questions about churn. We were asking questions about, a couple of meetings later, why bad debts were creeping up. and we never got any answers. I think, in fact, I don't think we ever really got answers to any of the problems within the business. I think they didn't want to admit there were problems there, rather than, I think, us, which was like, well, let's just give it some information so we can fix things. And the information wasn't really coming, was it? But yeah, I think that relationship, it wasn't necessarily a personal thing. I think Jeff is, actually, a nice human being. It was just at the time there was something going on where we weren't getting information. And when you don't get information, that's a pretty big breakdown, especially in a data-driven business as we were.
And you think it was deliberate on Jeff's part not to give us the information? That it was.
That's a good call. I think there's probably yeses and no's to any answer, right? Nothing's completely binary. Look, there was a lot of stuff that went into the reasons behind the cash flow not materializing. There's probably quite a lot of window dressing. As the business went into sale. I think one of the things, for example, not sure when or how factual this is, but the business turned off credit checking of users right around the time that we approached them, and then turned the credit checking back on, once the deal was completed, and that led to a huge amount of bad debt and churn coming through the business, as these people who couldn't afford the service ended up defaulting. So that was a great example. So when we were delving into churn and why the churn was up and why the bad debt suddenly skyrocketed after this great period of user growth, we wouldn't get any data on that. Now, does someone know that that's happening, or does somebody, irrespective of it, or just doesn't think it's important? I don't know what the motive is for not getting the data and having people delve into it more, but it was probably the most important thing to delve into at the time. It was leading to enormous problems with cash flow.
And then your relationship with Vaughan sort of also soured at sort of the same time. Is that over Jeff, or was that just generally?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the M2 team was they really they were a team. So when things started to sour with Jeff, when we started sort of poking quite hard at the business, they sort of grouped together, and I think that caused a breakdown between all of their relationships, and myself and potentially others on the board. So I think they're incredibly loyal to each other, and that probably soured it. Do I think that's a great characteristic to have on a board? Probably not, but it's a great human characteristic.
Yes, yes. And then you decided to sort of sell your shares and move on. Why did you decide that this wasn't a business that you really wanted to be invested in anymore?
Yeah, the reason I gave up being CEO was, what I thought was critically important was that we retained the chairman role. So that, without the chairman role, chairman had casting vote on the board. So you had 4 and 4 from each side, the chairman with casting vote. So I thought that was more important than, me being the CEO. And at the time, I was still a young guy. I was in a growing business. I didn't wear a suit, probably had some modicum of self-doubt, or quite a lot of modicum of self-doubt, whereas Jeff, seemed like, or may have been at the time, a strong leader. So I kind of felt like, well, maybe he'd be better at running a 2,000 person organization than me. So it was like, well, maybe I'm not the right guy. Maybe Jeff's a better. And then if Jeff's not, at least we've got chairman, and we can make changes there, if we need to. So if it had been the reverse and I stayed on as CEO, we wouldn't have had that supreme sort of get out of jail card with the chairman. So that was kind of how it turned out. Why we ended up. So I think between that and, selling my shares, like I was no longer in control of the business, I was no longer CEO. I just didn't feel like I wanted to have, large amount of money further invested in the business when, I wasn't able to, make the decisions and be in control. Couple that with sort of, real sort of culture mismatch internally. That was kind of the impetus behind selling my shares. I think it was after the August results, the first period after our merger.
You sort of left the board, and I remember when the first downgrade came out, you were enormously surprised about how bad it was. That it was just way worse than we thought. Now you knew what Vocus had brought to the party. And I guess your surprise at the time was there was nothing coming through from the M2 side of the business on those downgrades.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things. I don't think I was surprised at how bad it was. I was surprised that if you're going to do a downgrade, you don't make it, kitchen sink and all. And it didn't feel like that. But it really accounted for a lot of the M2 earnings, not really eventuating, not being there. None of the synergies coming through. Yeah, so I was pretty surprised. But I felt like, well, when you do the numbers, hopefully you've left some room to upgrade later on, or you made something that's very achievable. And that didn't feel like necessarily the case there. But look, I think it was also a little bit around, at Vocus we'd kind of taken a lot of our pain early on. So when we acquired a business, we'd invest in integrating it properly. We spoke to the M2 guys, in the due diligence phase, and they believed, and I really fundamentally think they believed this, is that they'd integrated as well. Just their version of integration and our version of integration, was a little bit different, a lot different. So I think that there was some sins of the past that, not like a house of cards. It's probably a bit extreme, but there were some sins of the past that had to get fixed in the M2 business, and that's really what caused that first downgrade, I suspect.
So when you left the Vocus board and you and that was your legacy, you had built that to a magnificent business and you're watching the demise of Vocus. How did it make you feel watching your baby being eroded
Yeah,
in a minute?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because it's not necessarily, the business, but it's hard when you see it make the wrong decisions. Letting go of the great people who built the business, but would also continue to add a vast amount of business there. And, losing people is okay, but losing them for the wrong reasons. I think in quick succession, we sort of lost Matt Hollis, we lost Chris Deere, some of the people I think you've interviewed, some of them I haven't listened to yet, Denise Hanlon. There's some great people there, but we lost them because, they would tell things as it is and people didn't want to hear that. And so, that caused cultural problems and they were let go. So that was probably the hardest thing, was to see the really good people that I knew would, I would never have tolerated losing, I would have, and did keep them, for as long as possible. And then to actually do the reverse and get rid of them was pretty fundamentally hard to watch. So, yeah, I think it was more the human side that made it particularly difficult, that seeing that sort of great culture, eroded over time. And it really taught me a lot around, I think we'd been a culture-led business at the beginning at Vocus. We always wanted to have great values. Don't screw the customer was one of our values. We just had this great ability to put everyone in the same direction. And that's when you get real leverage. And, I used to say to everyone, doesn't make the boat go faster. And I stole it from, I think, one of the American Cup design teams out of New Zealand. I forget the guy's name. It used to be written on the back of his wall. And someone would come in and talk about some stuff to the CEO or the guy running the project. And he'd just point to it and go, does that make the boat go faster? So, silos and politics and, he said, she said, and all of that sort of stuff would just be met with, that's not making the boat go faster. How do we make the boat go faster? And I think seeing that culture sort of break down was a real shame.
Denise Hanlon, in the interview with her, talks about that you always said, does it make the boat go faster? Which was quite interesting. One of the other very interesting episodes that happened to me, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, is the dinner that I was at with Jeff when I mentioned the Digital River story.
Yeah.
And Jeff...
Yeah, it was a great story, Digital River, by the way. I still ask Mark Simpson, because I think he described that as the worst deal in his career, because there was no warranties. You're not even warranty of how many kilometres or if they even owned that. There was shareholder fighting, but to your credit, John, we still did the deal. And I still ask Mark Simpson, is that the worst deal you've ever done in your career? The pause gets a little bit longer nowadays, but he still answers yes. So, it was a cracking deal.
But I remember sitting at a dinner telling everyone the story of Digital River and how you decided that if you were going to buy Digital River and you wanted it and went and bought it. And then Jeff lost it with me, totally started screaming at me about you. Not about Digital River, but about you. And I never quite understood the story as to why it was so offensive to Jeff until I did an interview with Chris Deere. And Chris Deere explained to me that M2 had their own fiber network that they never used. They parked it somewhere.
Yeah. We tried to buy it, actually.
Sorry?
Yeah. We tried to buy it, I think both before we bought Digital River and then after we bought Digital River, yeah, they had probably, you know, one of the, outside of the majors, it was the best fiber network in the country, way better than Digital River.
And I'm sitting there saying how you took this little business, Digital River, and built it into this massive business. And I never realized that Jeff had a bigger opportunity and just let it go. So I guess me saying how you did so well in this thing was sort of a red rag to a bull, and he took it. And to his credit, he did apologize the next day.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, look, I think it's just, again, different cultures. You know, I think at Vocus we had a celebration of, you know, of being wrong. You know, it was you know, it was far better to admit you made a mistake. In fact, we used to say at the new starters, you know, which is push the limits. You know, make mistakes. We actually want you to make mistakes in your role. Don't make the same one twice, but you know, really push yourselves. And so I think we celebrated mistakes because you learned from it. I remember one time we had an outage where we took down, I don't know, a couple 100,000, you know, retail customers. In the early days, we took all the internet traffic offline accidentally. You know, one of the engineers, I won't name him, but he knows who he is, accidentally sort of took down the redundant router and then took down the one he was going to work on, and didn't realize sort of for half an hour there was no internet traffic flowing across all of Vocus. And in the end, sort of everyone was thinking about how to write the message out to customers as to what happened, and everyone's putting up their hands and saying, oh, you know, it was a Cisco bug, or, you know, it was a denial of service attack, or all of these reasons. And in the end, I said to the guys, let's just tell them the truth. You know, like, we're not an organization that lies to our customers. Let's just put the email text out, and the text literally read, you know, on-call engineer made a mistake, pulled out the wrong cable. Apologies for the outage. And the amount of responses we got back to that was incredible. And the responses were 100%, not once, 100%, you know, positive, saying what an organization that actually tells us the truth. And second was, don't fire that guy. You know, he's worth more to you now because he'll never make that mistake again. And I think that was the crucial point, was we were definitely okay with mistakes, and we're definitely okay looking like idiots. You know, I did it many a time, and it was just an opportunity to learn. And I think a little bit of the reverse was the truth. You know, many of the M2 senior guys had to be, you know, seen as to be, you know, perfect and in control and making all the right decisions, and a very, very big difference in culture. But, you know, I love making mistakes. I think it's the secret to a happy marriage, is to admit when you made a mistake to your wife. And I think it flows into business as well.
You know what they say, James? Poverty breeds character, but I think I've got enough character.
That's right.
But there's a true story about a trader who loses, I can't remember the numbers, between $20 and $50 million. And he gets called to the chairman's office, and he packs his bags, and his desk is ready. He's ready to leave the firm on the turn, and everything's packed. And he sits in the chairman's office, and he says to the chairman, look, I'm really sorry. I've lost this amount of money, and I know you're going to fire me, and I'm here. I expect it. And the chairman said to him, I've just invested $50 million in your education.
Yeah.
There's no chance I'm firing you. Just don't let me invest any more money in your education. And that's
yeah, I'd like to see return now. Yeah,
hey?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's the lesson, right? Is never be upset by someone else doing something really clever in your own organization, right? Never be jealous of that, because you know, if you're at the top, that success is a reflection of you. It was the culture. You know, there's probably a reason why many mergers of equals don't work, and that's because, you know, there's no one clear culture in the driving seat. And you know, in the end, culture is the leverage to success, and we learned the hard way that it's the leverage to you know, to bad results as well.
Celebrating other people's success never diminishes one's own, and I think that it's an important lesson for as you get older. You sort of learn that their success is their success, and it's great, but it's nothing to do with you, and it doesn't make you any less of a person, etc. And I think if M2 would have adopted that culture with some of our guys, with some of the Vocus guys, I don't think we'd have gone through the absolute pain that we absolutely went through.
Yeah, I think success is not a zero-sum game, right? You don't lessen your own pile of success because someone else in the organization has some success. And I think that's the kind of the crux of it. I think there was a desire always, you know, the more senior you were, the more decisions you made and the more captain's calls you made, I guess. And I think that's fundamentally, a wrong culture as well. If you're the CEO and the people under you don't understand their area better than you, you've done something completely wrong in terms of the hiring, and that cascades through the organisation. So I always said my only job as CEO was to take the responsibility for what we did, not deciding what we do. That should come from other people. And then the only other thing I had to do was, mitigate between two, conflicts with people who wanted to do things, at the next level down that were different. And the way that we solved that was we always had everyone in the room. And I think one of the greatest things with our culture was, Mark Simpson, our legal counsel, could talk about the financial numbers in a meeting and be heard with the same amount of respect as the CFO talking about the financial numbers. And Mark or the CFO would talk about product decisions and revenue, out of sales as much as the sales manager. And I think that was great is, when you have a team that's aligned, the path of least resistance to the right answer is really achieved. And I think we always just didn't want to bash our heads against the wall. Just let's get to the right answer as quickly as humanly possible, and all back it.
One of the things I saw at Vocus during your time at Vocus was there was very little politics amongst staff, very little politics amongst the board. And when you left the board and David Spencer sort of left, the amount of politics involved on the Vocus board was dramatic.
Yeah, and I think in big incumbent organisations, the role at senior management is as much about politics as it is about understanding. If you asked a senior manager at Telstra or an executive manager, whatever they call it, or Optus or anywhere, have they been in a pit and pulled fibre through it? The answer would invariably be no. And I think that's the advantage is when you get people and you can get into a size and scale that's quite large, but people still know exactly what's involved in doing the job of other people. I was lucky being a founder. I swept the data center floors, when we bought data centers, and I did the first billing runs and understood the complexity and hard work that went into those things. And I think we respected everyone in the organization. I used to say this when we did an acquisition, which is an organization is like a car's engine. No one part is more important than the other. What's important is that it all works together to give you the performance. If the cheapest part in the engine, a spark plug, isn't working, the engine's not going to perform. So, the gearbox and the engine itself is no more important than the cheapest part. So it was always about working together to get the best result, or to make the boat go fastest. And again, I think the biggest regret is politics crept into that business after or didn't creep in, jumped in with the M2 acquisition and continued after there. And I think that was, a big, giant shift for many of the people who worked there, or most of the people who worked there. And that's probably the thing I was most disappointed down, is letting them down, because we had a great place to work. If you go and speak to almost anyone who ever worked at Vocus, it was one of the best, if not the best places to work. And that really changed overnight.
So James, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you really for doing this interview. It's been very much appreciated. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure, John. Thanks to everyone who's contributed. I haven't caught up on all the episodes, but what I have listened to has brought back a lot of really fun memories. Thank you.